from the Vero Essene Yahad, here's Jackson Snyder presents... I'm going to start answering questions from the comments on our presentations vocally. And the one I'm going to start out with is the latest one that I received, and that's from the presentation entitled, What Became of the Jews on Elephantine Island? And the question is, what became of the Jews on Elephantine Island? Evidently, in my presentation, I didn't answer that with enough research to answer the question that was given. So we'll try right now. And I find that answer at jhvonline.com. It's Greater Houston's Jewish news media from the Jewish Herald Voice. And the title of the article is Papyri Only Known Record of Elephantine Island Jewish Garrison by Aaron Howard. It's from December 5th, 2019. In the Nile River, almost at the border of modern-day Sudan, opposite the city of Aswan, on the mainland, sits a large island known as Elephantine. It was here, at a shallow section of the Nile River, where water tumbles over rocks, that Egypt always had to defend itself against infiltrators from the south. Elephantine Island was founded as a frontier military garrison. During the 5th century BC, a period not too far removed from the days of the Babylonian exile, the mercenaries who lived on Elephantine were Jewish. There's no consensus among historians about when these Jews came to Elephantine. It appears they were there prior to when King Cambyses II came to Egypt. Cambyses II was the son and successor of Cyrus the Great, a.k.a. Cyrus. He led the Persian army that conquered Egypt in 525 B.C. I would just note here that you can't expect that every Jew in Egypt followed Moses across the dry sea to get to Canaan. I am more certain than ever that a minority, or maybe even a majority of Jews that had to get out of northern Egypt went south to Sudan. There was once a town known as Alpha, just over the Egyptian border. I mean, just over. That we get tradition telling us that there was a sect that performed things very much like Jews and had a priesthood very much like Jews. And that sect continued on at least until 1880, when this reporter was actually writing his essay on the Alpha. But of course, we know in the late 50s that the Egyptian president called for a damming up of the Nile River. And in order to do that, they had to build a big old lake on the southern Nile, which they did, which covered up Alpha, so we can not go down there to research anymore, unless someone might want to go under the water to do that. That's very sad, because what I do is I trace the Alpha up to these fellows in the New Testament who are called sons of Alphaeus, though the text never says sons, it just says Yaakov the Alpha, or Matit the Alpha, another mystery that needs to be solved. So the Persian army conquered Egypt in 525 BC. Why were Jews doing this work? Why were they paid to be mercenaries at this time from Elephantine? Presumably, they had come to Egypt as refugees and were not allowed to work or to own land as citizens. They could serve as mercenaries. That's what they did. The Persians also were keen to guard the border after their conquest, and they trusted the Jews. So they're hired on by the Persians. There's no record of this Jewish colony in the history books. Nothing in the works of Jewish historian Josephus, and nothing in the Talmud or any official Jewish records. Isn't this unusual? We know about the Jews of Elephantine through the discovery of papyri, first found in 1893. The text is in Aramaic, written in Demotic script, which is an ancient Egyptian script used along the Nile Delta between the 7th and 5th centuries BC. Demotic. The papyri allow us to understand what was going on in the collective mind of the community, according to Karel van der Toom, author of Becoming Diaspora Jews, from the Yale University Press. That'd be a pretty interesting book to get. Probably costs about $200. The author is professor of religion and society at the University of Amsterdam. Knowledgeable in Hebrew and Aramaic, he spent 3 years deciphering what has come to be known as the Papyrus Amherst 63. Mary Cecil was the daughter of Lord Amherst and an amateur archaeologist who first encountered the papyri in 1893 and bought them. But that's another story. The papyrus gives us a direct written access to a Jewish community during the Persian period between 525 and 404 BC. Egypt was part of the Persian Empire. Van der Toorn's findings are based on his research into the Amherst 63 papyrus, 23-column scroll consisting of some 35 Aramaic texts. A translation of the texts into English appears in the book. I wish somebody would buy that for me. Becoming Diaspora Jews by Karel, Karel, van der Toorn, Toorn. Papyrus Amherst 63 is divided in sections. The first section is devoted to texts from an Aramaean community from Babylonia, worshippers of Nane and Nabu. The second section contains texts from Syrian Aramaeans who came from Hamath. Their religion is focused on the god Bethel. The third section is Sumerian and contains the 3 Israelite Psalms. They refer to Yahu as our bull, which is entirely in line with the North Israelite practice of venerating Yahweh or Yahu in the form of a young bull. One of the roles of a historian is to construct a narrative around the archival material he or she discovers. Van der Toorn contends these migrants to Egypt didn't claim a Jewish identity when they arrived. At some point in the 5th century BC, the Persian authorities decided to officially recognize the Jews whom they knew from Judea diaspora in Babylonia as a separate ethnic group. This entitled the community to follow its own traditions, including the areas of religion and law. In July 410 BC, the Egyptians of the island attacked the temple of Yahu, took everything of value, and burned the building to the ground. Here's a community of Jews forced out of their homeland, clinging to their religion on foreign soil, loyal to those nations they served, but ultimately victims of an anti-Semitic pogrom at the hands of their Egyptian neighbors. The event fits into a long-standing Jewish typology. In the end, no matter how hard you try to be on good terms with your neighbors, for some reason, you'll always end up on the wrong side of history. Demolition of the temple became the story of the Jews in a nutshell. After the destruction of their temple on the island, the community's leadership chose to deploy their Jewish identity to raise sympathy for their cause. Van der Toorn contends Elephantine is a diaspora story. This is a community that became Jews abroad who developed a Jewish identity not by choice but by circumstance. Once recognized by the Persians, they became a Jewish community based on the worship of the Elohim of the Jews, whom they called Yahu, and worshipped in a temple devoted to him, although they also worshipped other Aramaean gods as well. Their story, a typical diaspora tale, is not about remaining Jews in the diaspora, but rather about becoming Jews through the diaspora. According to Van der Toorn, I'm going to get that yet, Elephantine exemplifies the story of a diaspora community negotiating its membership in an empire. And framing the story of the Elephantine Jewish community in this fashion, Van der Toorn appears to place Elephantine Jews into a modern context, that of a diaspora minority negotiating its membership within an empire. Whether the author's narrative is correct or not, the story of the Elephantine Jews is a fascinating one. And that's the end of the article. And what I'm assuming here is that when the Egyptians came in and massacred everybody and burned the temple down, they all finally just left. This is the story of so many Jewish communities all throughout the Middle East, like Caesarea, same thing happened there. In the Decapolis, the same thing happened there. That is, the native dwellers of the town turn on the Jews and kill them all. And that's one of the reasons we hear tantalizing traditional stories about the wandering Jews. And we can thank Stephanie Soresi, Soresi, for that question. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio.